Christ is, in essence, a kind of super-consciousness, which, to paraphrase, is full connection to the all, or pan, via the opening of the pineal gland. Okay, but that is exactly what the so-called illuminated ones are doing, right? The same illuminated ones who are previously stated are under a demonic mind control. So, if I were to state that Christ consciousness is a good thing, then based on those previous statements, it would be an oxymoron. Well, not exactly. There is a paradox. I submit to you that there are two collective consciousnesses at work. One is the creative spirit, and the other is the opposite to that creative spirit. Although those who bond themselves to this demonic opposite of Christ consciousness use much of the same terminology, it is the opposite of what they perceive it to be, and has lured them in by plagiarising the authentic spirit, and so its victims, believing that they have Christ consciousness, in actual fact have Antichrist consciousness. It can accurately be said that this demonic collective consciousness is the Antichrist. So, with this in mind, you should now be able to see why Magog would seek to destroy the kingdom of Christ. They want to disconnect you from Christ consciousness and connect you to Antichrist consciousness, like the Borg in the Star Trek franchise, who assimilate different species into their own collective consciousness, and of course grow more powerful every time they do so. Why do you think the Borg fly around in a giant cube? It is the cube from the Tree of Life, which contains the abyss in the seventh corner, the seventh veil of Isis, and so you have 7 of 9. Why 9? Well, because a cube has 8 corners, 7 of which are visible, but inside the cube is the centre, and that cube's 0 point, which on Metatron's cube is another smaller cube. This is why the Borg Queen refers to herself as the beginning, the end, and the one who is many. In other words, she is the 0 point of the Borg cube. She even states that it is her purpose to bring order out of chaos, which is the motto of the Freemasons. So, 8 corners collect around the 0 point, which is, in the case of the cube, the 9th, hence 7 of 9. This is why in the Necronomicon there are 9 gates of hell, or the abyss, if you like. Demons such as Pazuzu, which is the demon from The Exorcist. Interestingly, in the same as above, so below pose as Baphomet. So, understanding that Christ consciousness, the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the cultist, or whoever is at one with, is in fact Antichrist consciousness, let us examine yet another pop culture example of this phenomena. Star Wars. Since we know that on the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, the 11th, or 33rd if you count the paths, Sephirah, is called the Abyss, and it correlates with Christ or Antichrist consciousness. However, there is another name for this other than the Abyss, and that name is Darth. Although the spelling is different, Darth and Darth Vader correlation is obvious. The character, Darth Vader, like Christ, was born of an immaculate conception, and if this wasn't enough, the woman that played his mother also played Mary in the film Mary, Mother of Jesus. This is either deliberate or an amazing synchronicity. And the word Darth itself describes, in the most brief of descriptions, the threshold from good to evil and from evil to good. The Darth Vader character, of course, goes through this exact process throughout the films. You may also find it interesting that after being seduced and manipulated and solicited into the dark side of the Force by the Sith Lord, there are certain instances throughout the film where a point is made to show Anakin's eyes shifting colour, and in the world of movies the change of eye colour is of course symptomatic of possession, which is what appears the filmmakers were trying to convey during the film, that Anakin has come under the possession of this so-called dark side of the bipolar force. It's also interesting how the main protagonist in Star Wars is Luke Skywalker. Luke is derived from Luz, which means light in Latin, and with the second name Skywalker, it becomes the light that walks across the sky, which is how Madame Blavatsky of the Theosophical Society and other occultists described Lucifer, as the light that walks across the sky. So in a sense, Star Wars illustrates the good versus evil battle of Jesus and Lucifer in reverse. In other words, told from the perspective of a Luciferian. On the subject of Darth, or Dat, a few Kabbalists believed it was associated with the New Testament demon Legion, due to it being the Sephirah that signifies the unity of all the Sephirah. Okay, so to put things in perspective, let's just recap on some of the words, numbers and symbols that mean Christ or Antichrist consciousness. 13, 33, 11, the Sun, Horus, Christ, the Abyss, Darth, the Chief Cornerstone, Illumination, the Swastika, Oz, 77, Pan, the Ouroboros Serpent, the Masonic Compass, the Checkered Corridor, the Phoenix, the Skull and Crossbones, and the Seal of Solomon. Since all of these symbols are basically referring to possession when dealing with the illuminated fraternities, we should now explore how and why this demonic Antichrist consciousness has orchestrated this 9/11 ritual and what exactly it intends to achieve by doing so. Based on what we already know about Crowley, like the fact that his purpose was to usher in the new Ion of Horus, something that he, or Iwas, declared himself the prophet of, and the fact that he was seeking to raise the consciousness of humanity, which is what the basic premise of this new Ion was, that he was the prophet of, I think it's fair to say that Crowley played a massive part in getting the ball rolling. Crowley's sex magic ritual with Pauline Pierce, resulting in the subsequent birth of Barbara Pierce, continued the process, with her later going on to marry Skull and Bonesman George H.W. Magog Bush, who together spawned the enigma that is George W. Bush. So Crowley, prophet of the new Ion, seek to raise humanity's consciousness, or usher in Christ's consciousness, except that he used the term Ion of Horus. Let's recap briefly that this process means landing us right here on the Tree of Life. Understanding this and following the timeline to his daughter marrying George H.W. Bush of Skull and Bones, we then see that within Skull and Bones, initiates go through the death rebirth ritual and, like the Nazis, seek to bring about the new Golden Age, or Thulu. This is just another way of describing the new Ion of Horus. So we're right back to the Abyss on the Tree of Life. Freemasons seek to bring about what they refer to as the New Atlantis. This is what they call the Great Work. But what really is Atlantis? Well, you will recall that the pillars of Jachin and Boaz have had many names attributed to them, i.e. the pillars of Atlas, the pillars of Enoch, the pillars of Hermes, pillars of Hercules and Solomon, and so on. In Francis Bacon's The New Atlantis, he looks forward to a future golden age, ruled over by Rosicrucian ideals. And in his book, Novum Organum, which translates as A New Instrument, the twin pillars of Hercules can be seen on the front cover. It is said that beyond the pillars of Hercules lays Atlantis. Atlantis, to cut a long story short, is the Golden Age, or the new Ion of Horus. And this puts us yet again right back to the 11th Sephirah on the Tree of Life. So from duplicity to oneness. This is why Hercules has 12 labours, like Jesus had 12 disciples. Now, metaphorical myths used to impart the very same knowledge, but just explained differently. It should therefore be easy to see why the 12 labours of Hercules, the 11th, was to steal the apples of Hesperides from Atlas among the Hyperboreans. And when we know that New York is the 11th state, and that New York City, as well as being 11 letters long, is the Big Apple, call me mental if you want, but the picture of the 11th labour of Hercules clearly shows Hercules looking at a big apple. In Genesis, the serpent tempted Eve to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and she caved in and subsequently did so, leading to Adam following suit and eating it as well, which of course led to what is commonly known as the fall of man. The end result is that we went from being at one with God to an insane bipolar existence of duality, black versus white, male versus female, negative versus positive, and of course the name of the tree itself demonstrates this, with its title, the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil, which is the same as saying the Tree of Knowledge of Jachin and Boaz, or the Tree of Knowledge of Severity and Mercy, or negative and positive. So, in essence, our fallen condition is our knowledge of this duality. But wait a minute, how can knowledge be a bad thing? Well, it's not that knowledge is either good nor bad, but more so that we depend on it. Whereas in our previous state of oneness, there was no dependence or reliance on outside sources to dictate to us what we should or shouldn't do. We didn't need someone to make rules and try and enforce them, or someone to make examples or demonstrate perhaps, why we should or shouldn't do something. We just intuitively knew. For example, if the government suddenly passed a law declaring it illegal not to breathe because doing so would result in you eventually turning blue and dying, I'm sure that you would be wise enough to realise that that would be insane, because you know that to breathe is natural. You don't need to be threatened into doing it. Presumably, no one should have to explain to you why breathing is necessary in order for you to do it. No demonstration necessary. In a state of oneness, we just knew it was not right or wrong. We just did not require an explanation as to why we should not do something that otherwise we would never have occurred to us in the first place. So eventually an outside source that previously separated itself comes in and introduces us to new concepts and ways of looking at things and reasons and demonstrations to corrupt us into a black and white view of what is essentially a rainbow, thus enticing us away from our natural state and seeding us with doubt, which leads to questions that only beget yet more questions, which this outside source, Lucifer or the serpent, whatever you want to call it, is only too happy to provide the answers to, shaping and moulding what it wants us to view as good or as bad. It is my contention that this is what it means to eat the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Knowledge is just that. It is knowledge. It is not wisdom. It is of no spiritual value. It is simply information, some of it truth and some of it lies. Not to mention the fact that most of it is useless and has no meaning whatsoever. Without spiritual wisdom, wrong can be right and right can be wrong.